Hello, and welcome to the Fire Chief's video message for November 2019. Clearly it has gotten cold. Clearly the winter months are on us, and with the sub-freezing temperatures that we're experiencing now and that rapid change, it is time that the winter is here. So make sure everybody's prepared for that and make sure that we're ready. But joining me here in studio, nice and warm today, is PIO Pete. Welcome. Thank you very much.
Yep. And the seasons are changing, and this is typically a very busy time for firefighters in the Mid-Atlantic region, and for us, and certainly with full moon, and you know how crazy that gets.
And we'll get to that because we've already had one of our, tragic fireplace ashes fires just this past weekend. So one of the things, and as sitting here in between us on the table is another tool in our toolbox, another capability that's now out on the EMS supervisor cars and the ballistic protection. What do you think when you see this, and what do you see this as in our operational area?
Well, I know that we do have a special operations folks that are equipped and have been, and now we're expanding that the availability of some of this protection gear. So it's for a active shooter situation or somewhere where our crews might have to go into a dangerous situation where there's some weapons involved and we may be assisting the police or something like that.
Right. It's another, as I used that phrase when we kicked this off, it's another tool. Ballistic protection equipment, or BPE, is a tool. Not on every rig, not for everyday call. The level of protection, the level that a ballistic protection or threat protection varies based upon how it's configured. These are configured with NIJ level 3, which is a pretty good level, a pretty high level, but these are also bulky. These are also intended to be limited use for a limited series of incidents. And the focus there is, as you said, active assailant, active shooter, high risk violence. There's a multitude of calls that these can be used on with county police's support and interaction with their emergency services unit, with the capabilities of the folks from the fire investigations unit, with the capabilities of the folks at 23, and then folks at any unit, as we did the training on this equipment in conjunction with the trauma care bag, which I'll talk about in a second. This provides us increased protection while we're in a enhanced risk area, and that risk is always going to be changing, and this is why it's offered as a tool to use. And Fire Chief's General Order 1805 outlines the BPE activities and the fact that it's at the incident commander's discretion. Now, these are only carried on the EMS supervisor and the battalion chief's car for broad distribution right now. Station 23 has these because of their enhanced assignment with the police SOD folks. And there's a couple other units out there that have LFRD obtained BPE, but these are to be used at the incident commander's discretion, at the incident commander's direction, so that they're used appropriately and outlined to engage. There was a lot of thought that went into the actual vest, and people were saying, well, why don't we have pockets? Why don't we have these other things to make this a multifunctional tool versus just the radio pocket? And the folks that were involved in this really, came to the point that it gets to be a bear and a burden. It gets to be, ergonomically a problem, which is why the trauma care bag and the components that rolled out with those, and one trauma care bag on every rig, and how with the tourniquets, the compression dressings, with some of the quick clot agents, as well as the halo seals, those bags have become invaluable. Not even in the high-risk environment, but just in a environment of being able to stop the bleed and deal with that high-volume blood loss and how those are making a difference in upon themselves, and then the patient carrier. So they're out there. It's a tool. Our folks all need to be aware of them. One of the unique natures of these is sizing. These are a broad size. There's two different sizes out there. They need to be assured that you know that this is the extra large, how to adjust the buckle on the side to get it to fit the best for you, because different people of different sizes needs to be adjusted correctly. I want to say a big shout out to Captain Jason Giza, the folks that set up these informational graphics, the how to don them, the website that talks about the ballistic protective equipment, provides those informations and some of that, refreshing topics about why we have this, what we're going to use these for, and how to interact or interface them into our operational environment.
Well, Chief, you touched on it a little bit, but we've been responding to low, moderate, and high risk incidents for a while. There's been a lot of discussion leading up to the development of this. Back and forth, of course, we work in concert with the police when you do have a moderate risk or high risk event. We stage. The police secure the area, so typically, these things might not be needed, as a first responder going in, but as you said, it's a tool in the toolbox. If something were to go down while we're engaged on the scene, these are things that we can add protection so our EMS folks can go in and administer some first aid in that hot zone area, high risk area.
Correct. So it's just something that came out right at the beginning of the month. It's now out there on the vehicles. There is a gap. There's a gap that I'm pushing on. The fact that right now, if we're using a spare buggy, we don't have the capacity to carry them in a battalion buggy or EMS buggy. We're going to develop a solution to that, because with technically 7 sets of this out there, we need to have all 7 deployable every day,
right,
so that they're fully functional and able to be used. So
well, let's hope that we never see these out.
Hope we never see them, but it's another tool in that toolbox, and something that's definitely positive and valuable. So
yep.
If you got questions, reach out to Captain Giza, folks in Special Operations, and EMS supervisors, and have them come out and talk about the BPE that's carried in the buggies.
Okay, sounds good.
So a while back, a couple weeks ago, I sent an email out. I used the word stigma. Tell me, what did that jump into?
Well, we in the region, there's been some suicides, and mental health issues have been at the forefront here lately. And of course, in Montgomery County, I think Chief Carr had the first suicide summit, over a decade ago. So it's been, discussed, and we have things in place. But of recent, there's been some suicides that have affected us in the region, and that led into some mental health discussions and so forth. And you had an opportunity recently, and along with others in the Department of Public Safety in Montgomery County, to meet with Congressman Trone, and talked about a number of issues.
This is a topic that's becoming more prevalent. It's a fact that on the last 5 years, it's reported that fire rescue and emergency responder suicide has exceeded line of duty deaths by approximately 30%. That's a national fallen firefighter numeric, in fact. And that, first responders are 5 times more likely to have the depression and the PTSD syndromes and issues than a general public. You're absolutely right that in the late 90s, or through the 90s and in the very beginning of the year of 2000s, we did have a significant problem. A lot of what could be described by some as undiagnosed depression and behavioral health issues within the department. We had a lot of deaths that we knew were suicides, probably several others that we couldn't attribute to or were related to. We've had a few since that time. It's something that we are definitely dealing with, and the incident recently with county police, brother, and how that shined a light on, and as the pastor Zetz talked about during his service, the word stigma. We are folks within fire and emergency service, public safety, law enforcement are very resistant to acknowledging that, resistant in asking for help. There's a lot of underlying causes to that that are varied based upon the organization and based upon the discipline. But one of the things that is incumbent is the ability to support. And we do have a multi-tiered approach method here in Montgomery County. We've had that for many years now, and that's a joint operation between the county employee assistance and county government, the fire rescue behavioral health staff, and the crisis critical incident stress folks, as well as the international 1664 and their peer support activities. It's a very collaborative and multi-tier approach. It is a big number. Based upon what's been reported, there were 88 reported suicides for fire rescue personnel in the country in 2019 so far. That's suspected to be only half of the actual number, and that's a big deal. Part of this is continuous training, continuous awareness. We're going to be having another cycle of behavioral health and mental health training upcoming in the February spring timeframe, as we get Dr. Beasley and team out to each station doing station level visits. We do have a very capable and highly regarded CISM team, and how they've helped both our police partners and some of our mutual aid partners at times of need when there's a critical incident. They're always there to help. Having in-house clinical professionals, both with Dr. Beasley and his specialties, as well as, while it's a team effort, we have our social worker and Lori and the other parts of that behavioral health team that helps everybody, because the circumstances that impacts behavioral health may not be from an active shooter event or a traumatic, specifically violent scene event. It may be family issues, it may be life issues, and those are addressed in different ways by different professionals. And then we're talking about the fact that we have multiple access points. I already mentioned EAP, I mentioned private healthcare providers, and the in-house resources that we have between 1664, the Center of Excellence, which is right down the street in Prince George's County, and is a great resource that is soon to be expanded to a West Coast location as well. But it's something that I want everybody to take that second and reflect on, the fact that saying that you have depression is not a label of negativity, a label of fault, or make one think less of you or less of your coworker. It is a disease that impacts people much differently, impacts everybody differently, and how they address that is very unique to their circumstances, and it's one that we need to be supportive of. We need to ensure that we're not continuing the label and the stigma pertaining to that word. And organizationally, I know that we have the support of the executive as well as others in the government to adequately and increase our levels of resources to address that. Because it is a problem, and it's one that we have to focus on and will be focusing on, as we have over the last decade to 2 decades.
Yeah, and it has been impressive. I mean, you touched on a couple of things, but You know, if you look at society in general, you know, we struggle as a nation, as a world global issue, the mental health issue. So, you know, our department is no different. But I think what separates us from the most is, you know, we are first responders. We go, typically are called out at the worst day of people's lives and manage that, and I think we do a pretty good job of that. But, you know, that weighs on us. I think statistically, and we know, and I've read that it's a lot of our life's experiences outside of work that impacts a lot of these things. And you know, we have, as a department, with Dr. Beasley and that whole staff, have been here for, you know, probably one of the first in the nation to have a psychologist on staff, and the team that goes along with that. And you mentioned our critical incident stress people. Of course, they're our peers. They work with us day to day, and I think that has made a big difference for us in our department.
Absolutely, and that's the nuance as we go from call to call to call. We go from dealing with and responding to a 5-year-old with febrile seizures or critical medical emergency that, you know, may be an infant code, to a sick person who may be one of our super users who's in need of help, maybe not needed specifically through fire rescue 911, but is in need of help and support, to car crash, to another type of incident, an automatic fire alarm or the such. So we definitely have the multitude of the wave of emotions and the wave of incidents. And our folks have to be able to go from one to the other. That's very taxing. And how one can address, reflect, and then address their reaction to that incident is unique, because everyone reacts differently to that. And while there may be a shift of 6 at that specific station, they're not all going to be able to process it in the same way, the same speed, and that's a unique nature that is definitely a part of our response environment. So,
and I mean, you know, that's normal. That's a normal day in the life. So again, we have the resources available, and I think there's a little focus on that. And even, you know, Congressman Trone was addressing it in Congress, you know, on a national level. There's discussion. So nothing wrong with talking about it, and I think that's the point of this whole discussion is, you know, reach out if you have some concern.
Absolutely. Transitioning, I wanted to give an update on new apparatus. There's continuous work going on with the new engines. We've made some progress forward. There's been manufacturer modifications on the vehicles which have improved the steering and the braking performance, but it's not yet to the point where we're assured that the vehicles are ready for operation today and will be, you know, practically safe, effective operationally, you know, 3 years and 5 years from now. We're reviewing the modifications that they've made. There was some dialogue in the last several days with the engineers to make sure that that's safe and reliable, because that's the key point. 23 of these rigs and getting them to be effective and safe, because this is a 30-mile-an-hour panic emergency brake application or significant brake stop. And that's a reality in the world of our response activity. Chief Friedman, all of the folks at CMF, and the new fleet maintenance supervisor, Bob Smith, they're anxious to get these units in service. I welcome Bob to the team, but we're not going to put them on the street until they're ready to perform well.
Well, and let's take a minute maybe to discuss why how we got to this spot. So we have the new apparatus, and we had them in the stations, loaded them up, kicked the tires. You know, obviously, it takes a while to get it to that point where they go through a lot of review and inspection, you know, before they're even here. So once they're here, same process. Our in-station personnel and fleet folks identified some things that were, you know, some improvements, some things that needed to be addressed, and that's kind of what we're looking at
Correct.
at this point.
So and the original, the prototype of this, engine 712, is due back in about a month. When it gets back, it's going to be looked at closely as well, because there was no identified problems like this with engine 712, and we're going to really evaluate it and see if this problem may have been present with 712. We just didn't test it or experience it.
Right.
And then if it's not, we're going to have another series of questions to address. So definitely a part of wanting to and ensuring that we do, when that rig is issued out, as it snowed yesterday, while it was very light snow, an emergency brake stop on a dry road is one thing. Rain the other night, wet leaves, slippery precipitation on the ground, that little bit of pull on a dry road is going to be amplified by the wet road situations. Right. And as we roll these rigs out during the next upcoming 3-4 months, we're definitely going to be in that time frame where we're going to have that. So that's a core point as to why we're assuring that these are safe and reliable for the residents, for the crew members, and everybody else.
And certainly a shout out to those that working on this project. I think maybe some other place and time that those units might have been put in service and try to work it out. But again, we have the opportunity to put those through the ringer. Right. And make them safe and ready to respond to, as you said, our community and our first responders.
And additionally, there's 16 EMS units in production as we speak. There's inspections planned in the next upcoming months to go to Jersey/Delaware to look at those rigs. That'll be a good batch. And again, the most significant point about those 16 is the power load, power lift. Striker units that'll be on those, so that's a big improvement from that perspective.
Right. Yeah. And so I know everybody's anxious and ready for that new equipment to arrive, and of course we've been over the last couple of years. We have been getting apparatus in, so soon we'll be in a pretty good spot. Obviously, we have a good fleet of reserve apparatus. We see them out on the road every day.
Well, we're struggling with aerials right now.
Yeah.
That's a fact. We're working in that process. The focus in calendar 20 is going to be in the aerial procurement and the aerial purchasing. So that's a part of getting these engines done and in service, and then transitioning and focusing into the aerials. And that'll be what we see next up on the campus, but that's still a little bit away. Rescue squads are still about 9 to 12 months away as well. Now, we talked about snow. We talked about the cold weather. What did we have the other night that was a perfect tie to the winter months?
Well, we had several at Labor Day weekend, or Veterans Day weekend. We had a home fire alarm get there, and they had a fire. Oily rags and spontaneous combustion, so that was a little unusual. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, but nobody was home to see the fire, but the alarm did alert. And that same day or shortly thereafter, we had the weather had been changing. People were using their fireplaces up in the North Potomac neighborhood. A young person apparently put some fireplace ashes they thought were cool into a plastic bag. Put the plastic bag into a recycling bin outside. It just happened to be next to a car parked in the driveway on an attached garage of a single-family home. So a passerby saw the car on fire and called 911. Of course, the fire did impinge on the home a little bit.
Right.
There were no injuries, but as you know, I mean, you've talked about this before in years past, that we will typically have 4 or 5, maybe half a dozen of these fires just caused by fireplace ashes.
Yep, so we just changed our clocks. So we just talked about changing the clocks and checking the smoke alarms. We just talked about, we had a proclamation about the carbon monoxide alarm regulation that went into effect back in July. It was led by Councilmember Rice and Councilmember Elrich at the time. This is the colder months. We get the alternative heating activities, fireplaces, wood stoves, ashes, chimneys, keeping chimneys and flues cleaned, and as an example. And absolutely, we're going to have, and these ashes fires are all preventable circumstances. And that's a clear point that we want to get everybody to understand and everybody to recognize that. Cool those ashes, make sure that they're really cool before they move them out. And when they do move them out, either wet them down, place them in the fully enclosed metallic container, place that container away from anything else combustible. Several different steps or multiple steps in that process. But it is cold and we're going to have that, but the men and women need to be ready for that cold. Because as soon as you get wet when you're cold, it's very challenging to be cold and wet. And this weather is going to be a challenge for that for sure.
Yeah, and it's, typically this is a very busy time. And, people will have the clutter of the summer and fall around their heating systems. And of course, they're working overtime. You have exposure to pipes and freezing and things of that nature. But, Thanksgiving's coming. And a lot of cooking is typically the #1 cause of fire year round, but certainly this time of year, that becomes a problem or an issue. So yeah, it's a very busy time of year, and of course we have many opportunities to engage with the community and talk about these things, which we had some pretty good after the fire safety in the neighborhood activities here recently, and a lot of community engagement otherwise. So we're able to talk about that and close your door. Safety and things of that nature. So a lot of good effort, community engagement going on as well.
Absolutely. So appreciate the information about that fire in Chevy Chase and in the North Potomac. And as you said, it was an automatic fire alarm early in the morning, which in and upon itself is a little odd, a little peculiar, but as we have every year, we have 1 or 2 of those where we're going for an automatic fire alarm and arrive to find or get an update en route that this is, and actually indeed a structure fire. And this fire had predominantly burnt out in the kitchen, but was now in the walls and in void spaces. So definitely one thing to always consider: the original call, the nature of, and be prepared for the worst case scenario. So as we wrap up the November cycle, and we wrap up the video this month, prepare for the opportunities out there. Use the training. We have our monthly basic training on meters this month. MBT has given us a lot of good capability and training to go through. Recruits are out there, and probationary members getting stations together. Recruit Class 46 is in session. By the time we tape next month's session, Recruit Class 47 will be in seat at the Academy, looking for 59 folks for that class. Pretty big class. Looking forward to that with RC 47. Maybe it's your duty crew, your duty night, your standby night, your training activities. So take all the opportunities to train and prepare for. Maybe it's the ballistic protective equipment. Maybe it's the new meters. Maybe it's the mechanical CPR. Maybe it's the other technology or the other component of MBT, which was elevator emergencies as an example. So be ready, have that training taken care of. In this cold weather, always come to work or your standby ready for the environmental conditions that you may face. And until next time, be safe.